Hello everyone out there in YouTube land. I'm going to do some videos on the Bible and what I'm getting off of the Bible and representation of my opinion on what it says. This is actually my first video ever I've done on this, and it's going to be about Zechariah 12 and 13. I'm doing it because of a friend of mine on YouTube. I asked him a question and he did a video, and I figured I would put one out there too to what I see here, what it says. He's Hard Truth Ministries. I'm sorry, I don't know your name, so we'll call you Hard Truth Ministries for now. But I've been on this for a while, and I've come to a pretty sincere conclusion on this. And if you read through Zechariah 12, it definitely states a few things here. This is what it says. This is the word of the Lord concerning Israel, the Lord who stretches out the heavens, who lays the foundations of the earth, and who forms the spirit of man within him, declares. This is God declaring here. I am going to make Jerusalem a cup that sends all the surrounding peoples reeling. Judah will be besieged as well as Jerusalem. Now stop here for a second. If anybody doesn't know what the word besieged means, it means surrounded by warriors. You are under attack. That's what that means. And I would encourage you to go and get a Bible and read this yourself and question it on what I have to say. And something of this great magnitude needs to be questioned. I think it's great that you would question what other people say and what this is telling you. And I'll continue. On the third day, when all the nations of the earth are gathered against her, I will make Jerusalem an immovable rock for all the nations. All who try to move it will injure themselves. On that day I will strike every horse with panic and its rider with madness, declares the Lord. I will keep a watchful eye over the house of Judah, but I will blind all the horses of the nations. Then the leaders of Judah will say in their hearts, the people of Jerusalem are strong, because the Lord Almighty is their God. On that day I will make the leaders of Judah like a fire pot in a wood pile. I don't know if you know anything about a fire pot in a wood pile, but the wood ain't going to last too long in that situation. And that's what he's saying. He's going to make Judah. They're going to be so strong here that nobody will be able to mess with them. Never, ever, ever. They're going to be like a fire pot in a wood pile. And if you keep reading, it says, like a flaming torch among sheaves. Now, a sheave is just a bushel of wheat, a large bushel of wheat. So a flaming torch on a dry, large bushel of wheat is going to utterly destroy it. So that's what's going to happen to the rest of the nations when they decide to do this attack on Jerusalem. When Jerusalem is founded and ready and the rest of the nations try to attack, it ain't going to happen too well for them, because Jerusalem, God's land, God is going to have their back for sure. The Lord will save the dwellings of Judah first, so that the honor of the house of David and of Jerusalem inhabitants may not be greater than that of Judah. On that day the Lord will shield those who live in Jerusalem. The Lord is going to protect everyone in Jerusalem, so that the feeblest among them will be like David, and the house of David will be like God, like the angel of the Lord going before them. Now, one quick stop here. What we can do is, if we take a look into the New Testament and we go to Matthew 12:3, I suggest you probably read the whole thing, but I'm just going to read this one verse because to try to make my point here. But Jesus literally says this: God, manifested in the flesh as a human, says these words. He answered, Haven't you read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? This has to do with Jesus breaking the Sabbath, and that's a whole nother subject altogether. But I want you to see that Jesus says to the Pharisees, go look at what David did. You need to look into what David did. That's basically what they were saying. You got people running around today talking about what would Jesus do? Well, what Jesus did is he died a terrible, horrific, murderous death for you, so you could become closer to God. And Jesus says, this is a huge lesson. Go look at what David did. David was God's man. Like, he was the man, God's man. And Jesus is saying to the Pharisees, you guys are so wrong. Go look at what David did. And I encourage you to go look at what David did and compare it with what the world tells you today. We're going back to Zechariah. Let me find where we are. On that day, I will set out to destroy all the nations that attack Jerusalem. So God's saying on that day that this is going to happen, no other nation is going to be able to survive. There's no way. You cannot fight against God. It's impossible. So, like you said, Hard Truth Ministries, you look in the news and you see it going on in Israel and you see all this stuff going on today. But I think when this happens, I think this is quite a bit in the future. I mean, I would hope and pray that the Lord comes and takes me now too, before I have to deal with any of these wraths. But on that day, I will set out to destroy all the nations that attack Jerusalem. That's what God's going to do. All these people attacking Jerusalem, you're attacking God, basically. But one thing I do have to bring into context right now, if you go back to God's law, in Exodus 20, verse 6, God says in the law, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. Well, God says he's going to show love to 1,000 generations. And if you go off of the math, biblical standards, and I think you might want to do that, that's 1,000 generations. If you start with Noah, he's going to show love to 1,000 generations. Oh, I know what you're thinking. Oh, he doesn't show us love. Oh, he does. He gives you a place to live. He lets you live. He lets you be a being. In my opinion, that's enough love. But he's going to show love to 1,000 generations. And if you do the math on that, we're still quite a ways out. That would be, 20,000 years at our human standard of generations, at 20 years per generation. And if you go by biblical standards, Noah was on the earth maybe 5,000 years before Christ. So there's something going on there. I'm not too sure, but in my opinion, there's something up with that. Let's get back to Zechariah here. So we were on verse 9 on 12. On that day I will set out to destroy all the nations that attack Jerusalem. Now the next word says and. So and, which is a continuation of the verses we have just read. And I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication. They will look on me. They will look on me, God, the one they have pierced. And they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and grieve bitterly for him as one grieves bitterly for a firstborn son. Now, we know that if we go to John 19:33 and read through the whole chapter of John to get it in correct context, it's really hard to understand what's going on here if you don't read the whole book. You can't just read a sentence and think you know what's happening. 1933, Jesus is dead on the cross. They didn't break his legs, which is a whole different prophecy. But he's dead, and the soldiers come up to him. We're going to start here. But when they came to Jesus and found that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. That's a prophecy, a whole different set of prophecy. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced Jesus' side with a spear, bringing a sudden flow of blood and water. And if you go back to Zechariah 12, where we're at, and I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication. They will look on me, the one they have pierced. So there's a double prophecy happening here. The one they have pierced is the Christ. And when they pierced the Christ, this is what happened. Pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace. That's what happened when the death occurred. The law no longer exists. Now you can have a spirit of grace. And it's a prophecy within a prophecy. The problem here is that you're not going to want to be around, just like Hard Truth Ministries says, when this goes down. Because it'll continue on here. As they're weeping bitterly and grieving for a firstborn son. One thing happened when they did kill Jesus. Nobody really wept for him. There was 3, maybe 4 people there. So you can't take this too far in context. He's proving it's him. He's proving he poured out the grace by the piercing. But there's a problem here because nobody really mourned for him when that happened. But what this is saying is when he comes back, when the war happens and Jerusalem is being besieged and God stands foot for Jerusalem, no other nation is going to get through there. And that is what's happening here. On that day, the weeping in Jerusalem will be great, like the weeping of Hadad Rimmon in the plain of Megiddo. Now, I've done some investigation on this Hadad Rimmon in the plain of Megiddo, and I can't really find nothing. Nothing at all. Some people have some speculations that it's this and that, but there's no real hard evidence of this place. And in my opinion here, I don't think this place exists yet. I think this is a little ways off, and this place doesn't exist yet. And this weeping that happens at Hadad Rimmon in the plain of Megiddo hasn't even happened yet. And it's going to be a great weeping, maybe atomic warfare weeping. I don't know. But if you continue reading, the land will mourn, each clan by itself, and their wives by themselves, the clan of the house of David, and their wives, the house of Nathan, and their wives, the clan of the house of Levi, and their wives, the clan of Shimei, and their wives, and the rest of the clans and their wives. The rest of the clans and their wives are going to weep. Why? Because they never gave Jesus a chance. You have to give him a chance. They're weeping because it's now over. This happened. The end happened. The world attacked Jerusalem. Jerusalem stood firm. But these poor clans never decided to take Jesus and the grace of supplication in their heart. And now they are screwed. And they are weeping about it because their chance is over. And if you continue reading on, it goes into chapter 13. On that day, it says, a fountain will be opened to the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to cleanse them from sin and impurity. On what day? On this day, on the day of wrath, when God wins against the rest of the nations, against the rest of the world trying to attack Jerusalem. That's what that is. That's what that day is. And then it says, on that day I will banish the names of the idols from the land. That means this is the end, man. He's going to banish the names of the idols from the land. Because if you know anything about God, he don't like your idols too much. No, he don't. I will remove both the prophets and the spirits of impurity from the land on that day. Well, that's because we don't need them anymore. Because we are now living in eternal life with the Christ. And then it continues on, if anyone still prophesies his father and his mother to whom he was born will say to him, you must die because you have told lies in the Lord's name. When he prophesies, his own parents will stab him. And this continues on, but I'm going to stop right here because I think I've made a effort and a contribution, and I hope anybody that watched this, it makes sense to them. And if not, then maybe leave a comment and I can help clear something up, or my friend Hard Truth Ministries can help clear something up for you too, because I'm pretty sure me and him are on the same page on what these Bibles say, what this Bible says, the Bible of God, the God of Israel. Thank you.